And we're live. It is Friday, September 25th, 2020, 5 o'clock, or rather 4:59. We're a minute early today. 2020, 4:59 p.m. I'm at the cabin in the woods. There's a smoky fire. Kate has found a tiny turtle. And in Poland, it is 11 o'clock at night. We don't know time zones here on In Lieu of Fun. We do know Anne Applebaum, though, who has shown up by audience demand. I don't think there is anybody we have had more demand for than Anne. And I have tried to assure the audience on numerous occasions that keeping people up late in Poland is not what we started this show to do. But the audience would not be deterred. Every Saturday, Kate and I would plan the show, and people would demand, when are you having Anne Applebaum on? And it came to the point that people were starting to even doubt that Anne and I were even really friends.
It's true. All of this is true.
For many years at the Washington Post, even though we have, we commuted together for a while. Anne and her husband Roddick would drive me home many days from the Washington Post. Even though she would show up on the Lawfare podcast, and that challenged me. So
oh yeah, that was the thing.
I wrote to Anne, I said, when are you coming? Audience demands you. When are you coming on In Lieu of Fun? And she said, I don't know, you want to do Friday? So Anne is up late in Poland. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but apparently we are allowed to have Anne Applebaum. So, welcome to the show.
So, thank you so much. I mean, fun enough, one of the reasons I'm up is that I've just done a kind of very intense internet session with some really impressive, kind of brave and interesting Belarus dissidents. And so I'm feeling all inspired and impressed with how well things are going in some parts of the world. So
as the old saying goes, what happens to Belarus in August happens to America in December. So it's an old saying that I just coined. So how are things going in Belarus?
So it's very hard to say whether they're going really well or really badly. They have created a social movement. I mean, it looks like it's been created from scratch. In fact, it's been in the works for a number of years. They very intelligently used, amazingly, given how much I now hate social media, they have very intelligently used one particular app, which is called Telegram, as an app that both kind of aggregates video and reporting from all over the country and then rebroadcast it. So it works almost like a radio station. And they have built links between people that didn't exist before. And at the very end of my event I just did, I said to the three very impressive youngish people on the podcast, I said, what's going to be the long-term effect of this? And I was thinking in terms of, well, there might be martial law, there might be a crackdown, there might be mass arrests. And they were like, no, we've rebuilt our society. We've created links between people. We've created relationships that didn't exist before. And this has to have some meaning down the road. And it was very impressive and moving. One of the things you should know is that the Belarus protests are, I think this happened organically, but but they're very similar in some ways to the Hong Kong protests in that there is no clear leader. They're sort of bottom up, grassroots up. They apply the same theory of be like water. They will appear at different places in different times, depending on what's going on, and they are. So they're partly spontaneous, they're partly kind of, crowd organized. And actually, one of the people who was on the call with us was saying that in some ways they reminded him of how the Black Lives Matter protests were created in America. But that's maybe that's an analogy too far. But they're very hopeful that they will get some kind of real change out of this summer of amazing freedom. This is something they've never ever had before. There's never been a mass protest movement in this country ever, and now there is.
Do they have a unified sense of what they want? I mean, I think one of the things that at the end of the day really hurt the Arab Spring was that there was a unified sense only to a certain extent of what they wanted, right? Mm. There was, they wanted, not Hosni Mubarak, but that's and I think like not, that gets you only so far. Is there enough of a common thread running in these activists to get you past the day when the regime falls?
I mean, it's too early to say. I mean, and the political acumen and so on is all still evolving. I mean, they're very lucky in the way that Eastern Europe was lucky in the 1990s in that they have a very clear goal. I mean, the goal is to be a European country. And they know what that looks like because it's on their border. So their goal is, Poland or Germany or France. I mean, they know which direction they're going. I mean, and that was a problem for the Arab Spring that, they some cases had explicitly rejected Western models as inappropriate for themselves. And so it didn't make a good goal. But no, I mean, if you talk to them, they're not, I'm not saying this is a great, sophisticated movement with, where they have economic plans up their sleeves and they're ready to go the day they take power. I mean, I don't think that's the case at all. But they do have a vague sense. I mean, and they've even used the same language to me that I used to hear in Eastern Europe in the 1990s, which is we want to be normal, and normal means we want to be European. And that gives them a kind of something to look at. I mean, I should stipulate, I mean, I don't know, given the role that Russia is already playing in Belarus and it's evident that, Russia has sent journalists to take over the Belarus state media, and they've probably sent thugs to run the police as well. I'm not sure any of this is possible, but, maybe it is true that they've changed their country in important ways. They've already given people the sense that they have agency and they can do something, and it's impressive.
Did all of this come out of, did all of this kind of protest building and movement building like a result of the since the election took place, or was any of it like fomenting and kind of like simmering under the surface before the election took place? Like how much accelerant and how much impetus did the actual election results or lack thereof have?
It was simmering for a long time. I mean, there were a lot of things that had been done over the last kind of 3, 4, 5 years that seemed very minor, that are only now having an impact. For example, so the fact that, and this is thanks to a Polish, a kind of Polish political move, because the European Union, included Belarus in this thing called the Eastern Partnership. That meant that young Belarusians could get scholarships to study in Europe, okay? And one of the most important figures in this movement is a very young guy. He's 22. And he is right now in Warsaw running the most important Telegram channel. This is the app that they use to do mass communication. He's got something like 2.5 million followers, which is, I think, the largest Telegram channel in the world. Why is he in Warsaw? Because he got something called an Erasmus Fellowship. This is an EU fellowship, to study at a university there. Why did he get that? Because the EU had made this decision several years ago to put Belarus in this category so that people like him could come there. He, at the same time, is the product of there's a group of very patriotic Belarus Democrats who created a kind of underground high school in Minsk, and have been, bringing up their children for a number of years in a kind of patriotic democratic spirit. And quite a lot of the people who are now running this activist movement come from that kind of environment. So little things that were done. I mean, then, there's a tradition of independent journalism in Belarus. I mean, it's all been online and, not really recognized and not really well funded, but it's been there. There has been U.S. investment, not just U.S., but in U.S. and EU investment in independent radio, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the BBC, and the fact that there are these other outlets that exist have also suddenly it matters, whereas it all seemed pretty fringe 5 or 6 years ago. So there has been building these kind of links between people and a kind of underground relationships that seemed, I mean, even I underestimated it. I underestimated the importance of these things, and they seemed unimportant until suddenly this summer they mattered. And that's just how civic activism works. It looks like nothing. It looks like it's stupid. It looks like it's a waste of time. And then suddenly there's like the right moment, and it just matters that people have these links together.
So I'm interested in how this interacts with the thesis, such as it is, of your book, The Twilight of Democracy. I say such as it is because the book actually very self-consciously doesn't advance a strong thesis.
There's no one-line summary of the book.
Exactly.
You can't do it.
But I think it's fair to say that the mood of the book, as portrayed in these discussions and portrayals of yours of authoritarian-leaning and sometimes more than leaning activists in a variety of countries, is sort of pessimistic about the fate of liberalism, and it's certainly a pessimism that the world has given good cause for. And then you publish it, I think, at the middle of the summer, and, just when you weren't looking at Belarus, liberalism kind of explodes there. So what should we make of this in interaction with the twilight of democracy? Is it like twilight everywhere except Belarus?
No, I've been asked that question before. I mean, so one of the points about my book is that one of the arguments it makes is that history is radically open. That means neither are we condemned to eventual dictatorship, nor should we be complacent and certain that democracy will always triumph because it always has and because America's lucky and that's just how things are. We don't know what will happen in 10 years. And all of us should be prepared for whatever that might be. And we should be working towards the outcome that we care about. You can't kind of lean back and assume that, democracy is like water that comes out of the tap. You just turn it on and it will always be there and you don't have to especially do anything to make sure of it. No, we're all people who, we should all be going to the well every day to get the water. We need to think about where it comes from a little bit more than we do now. So no, I don't think that the ideal of democracy, which is really an ideal about justice, it's an idea that we can all have some kind of say in how our society is run. We can have some influence on it. Decisions aren't made in distant places by dangerous autocrats. They're made by all of us. I think the appeal of that idea, I can't imagine it ever going away. The question is, does it work? Is it functional? Do the institutions that we've set up to channel it, do they still work the way they're supposed to work? in the 21st century and not just the way they were meant to work in the 18th century. So it's not that I think, democracy has to die or there's some inevitable decline coming. It's that I wanted just to remind people that we might have to do something in order to make it work. Just like the Belarusians, these are people who are, they're just ordinary people. They're bus drivers and school teachers and so on. And they have been going out on the streets and demonstrating at huge cost potential to themselves. I mean, it's very dangerous to demonstrate in Belarus. And they've been going out, every weekend, with the hope that can make a difference. And I'm not saying that demonstration or protest is necessarily the thing that we're going to need in America. We may need other things. But the point is that some kind of civic involvement and engagement might be needed, and we should all be prepared for that.
Yeah, so it's funny that you I was in an international conversation at UT Law School today about social media and democracy, and we basically ended on the note that you just said, which is that there was a woman from Turkey there who asked a question and said, "Hey, listen, the government many years ago turned off Wikipedia in our country. What are you talking about with this idea of techno-utopianism and libertarianism?" And then on the other hand, we had people in Canada being like, "Why can't the government just take over all of social media? What could go wrong?" And the conversation was kind of going back and forth in this way. I think that you bring up this really great point. And Telegram is an amazing tool. End-to-end encryption in general is an amazing tool to keep authoritarian governments away from kind of these messaging technologies and communications technologies from protest. But aside from that, I am really curious, since you've been in Poland. I don't actually know how long you've been in Poland, if you've been there since the beginning of the pandemic or if you traveled there in the midst of it but I'm curious, one, how that has gone and give us kind of an update about what the scene is right now. And then also what the perspective is and what people are saying and thinking about outside the United States bubble, although you might be very immersed in it still. But outside the United States bubble about what they're thinking about the U.S. election.
I mean, the pandemic here. Oh wait, now I'm getting a weird echo. Maybe it will stop. The pandemic here. We had one of those very dramatic pandemic stories where my husband was driving down a road. I forget which day it was, March the 8th or something, and heard on the radio in the car that the borders were going to close. And I was then in London and both of our sons were in the US. And he pulled over to the side of the road and called us, and we all immediately got on planes and came here. I got on the very dramatic London flight, last flight out of London to Warsaw. As many people said, well, it's sort of the reverse of what happened in 1939. My younger son took a plane from Washington to, I think via London to Berlin, and then by the time he landed, it was too late to get into Poland on any form of public transportation. So he took the train to the border, got out of the train, and then walked across the border, carrying his luggage, into the country. And my husband picked him up on the other side because everything had shut down. And so we were here all the way through the pandemic. You can see this is my Polish country house. It's a house that we restored. It's described a little bit in the book, actually. The book begins with a party that we gave here in 1999. And we've been here since the beginning. I mean, one of the conclusions I have from being here is that some of what is succeeding or not succeeding in the pandemic is a little bit random. So Poland has not had so far, and I say so far because the numbers are now going up quite quickly, but has not so far had a very bad pandemic. And I think that's partly the result of luck. They didn't really get it until March, whereas, many European countries, including Italy and England, probably had it as early as January. It was already passing around the population. And by the time everybody understood it, it was already endemic. And here, I don't think they did. They didn't get their first cases until they started looking for them in March and April. And because Poland is a kind of naturally socially distanced country, we don't have really a bar culture here. There isn't a pub culture. It just didn't spread as fast. There aren't a lot of cities that have crammed in public transportation like New York or London. And I don't think they did anything particularly well. They didn't create an amazing test and trace system or anything like that. They did quarantines, which is maybe something that Americans would find, So when we came back into the country, we were all under quarantine for 2 weeks, and we had to stay in our house. And the police came to check to make sure that we were there. We had to all walk out into the porch and wave. And that was, it was a little weird, but we accepted it as part of the arrangement. But we may yet have a second wave here that's quite bad, because people, nothing particularly positive has happened recently. But I do have to say, from the perspective of Poland, from London, where I was last week, and actually from Germany, where I was a couple of days ago, the United States does look like an unbelievable outlier. It's so much worse and so startlingly incompetent. And in a way, the reason why people are so shocked by it is because it's not what they expect. America has it has the best, the best biomedical industry in the world, and we have the best scientists, and we are the most, the biggest economy, and all the kind of superlatives that you normally attach to America. People were expecting to come out during the pandemic, and as it hasn't happened, and of course everything. The other weird thing about American politics is that everything that happens in America appears instantly on Polish Twitter or whatever, German YouTube, as a series of clips or something. And so everybody can see, the same things that you guys are all looking at. The people without masks walking into the Walmart and demanding to be, we need our freedom, and we need to, everybody sees that everywhere. And it's been very shocking, so why are Americans why don't they listen to their government? Why don't they care about public health? What's wrong with them? Although there is a little fringe of people, of course, who admire that, and you have now a kind of German far-right anti-COVID conspiracy theorist little movement going, in Germany that is somewhat taking its cue from Trumpism and from the anti-maskers in the United States.
And the UK.
And in the UK, and you have it in Germany. I've seen it in the UK. I've seen a version of it in France. Here it's a very minor, but it also exists. And they are watching. It's because they're watching U.S. politics, and that's where it comes from. And then in places, 95% of the German population is doing what Angela Merkel says they should do, and they're all listening to the rules and wearing masks where they're supposed to wear masks. And Germany's had very low rates, actually. And where they have had some cases, they've been very quickly controlled, and they've had relatively very few deaths. But America really stands out by comparison. Even to Poland, which, as I said, isn't particularly doing anything right or wrong. There's really no country with the numbers like America, or with the anti-public health movement of the size that you have in America, and people are kind of staring in horror. They laughed at Trump for the bleach speech, the maybe you should inject it comment, but they're also kind of sympathetic and sad. We're so sorry this is happening to your country is the response that I often hear.
David Bass, the floor is yours. We've got a gazillion great questions. And so I think we're going to use as much of the time available. I promised Anne we would end on time so she could go to bed at least a semi-reasonable hour. But I want to use as much of the time to get to your questions as possible. So I will just keep bringing people in. David, the floor is yours, and the dog shirt is awesome.
Thanks, Ben. And I thought that if I featured a dog shirt, it was only fair to also feature Lisa Page. It's only fair. Anne, thank you so much for coming on. What are some of the lessons that you've observed in Poland, Eastern Europe, that frankly the citizens of USA would be well served to consider as it relates to the rise of authoritarianism? And are there any particularly impactful narratives that you have heard from the people there in Poland? Thank you.
So I would say that the most important lesson is to take it very seriously very early, because people didn't hear. And many of the initial reactions were too tepid, or too, oh, well, it's just, it's going to blow over, or it's just, it's not serious, or people won't support that. And above all, I would say the most important lesson is to remember what it is, what kinds of things really move people. I mean, so one of the things that happened here, and this will appeal, I think, particularly to this audience, and I think it was what I was I've been on Lawfare, on Ben's blog to talk about, not blog, podcast to talk about before, was the attack on the independence of the courts. So there was a egregious attack on the Constitutional Tribunal, and people were forced out, and very politicized people with no legal reputation were forced onto the court in order to take it over and make it partisan and beholden to the government. And at that time, there were a lot of big protests. There were mass protests outside courts all over Poland. But it turned out that was not an issue that moved enough people. And that an abstract issue like the courts, or separation of powers, or wasn't moving enough to make people care. And the Polish opposition took a long time. Still hasn't really, I think, at least the leadership, still hasn't really, figured out what you do to fight populist narratives in a way that you can get a mass. You can get 25% of the country behind you to fight for independent courts, but it seems like you can't get 51% of the country, which is what you need. The other lesson has been that the instinctive way that a lot of liberals want to respond to populism is by giving the opposite message. So we are all united, because I should be clear, the populist message in Poland is we, the ruling party, are the true Poles. You are foreigners and atheists and traitors. And there's no such thing as a legal opposition, or only we deserve to have power. And that's the narrative that they use. And they've coupled that with a lot of public spending on their constituency. And they've kind of locked in that narrative. We're the true Poles, we deserve power, we're the rightful rulers of this country, and everybody else is just is a traitor. And one of the ways in which the opposition tried to counter that was by saying, well, no, we are all Poles, kind of nice. They tried to respond to this very nasty and ugly rhetoric with sort of niceness. And it worked, but only up to a point. That got them up to about 48%, but not to 51 or 52%. And really rethinking what are the muscular, emotional, even angry arguments for liberal democracy is something that turns out to be a very hard thing to do. It's not the natural way that liberal Democrats speak. I have my theory, and those of you who who've been paying attention will understand why. I think that social media has made us all speak that way. And we're going to have to learn to, until we regulate social media, which I hope we will, we're going to all have to learn to somehow adapt to this form of media and this form of communication, and find a kind of counter narrative that it really attracts people and isn't just about, hey guys, we think rule of law is important, norms are important, and should we all be nice to each other? We may need something something deeper and more, something that can move people a little bit more profoundly than that. I would say that's the lesson of Poland. I think the Polish center and the center right and the center left have been surprised by the degree to which, completely false narratives, really quite extreme views, very homophobic and anti-Semitic, for example, had so quickly taken over on national media, on state media, and in the government, and how quickly people accepted them. And coming up with a counter argument turned out to be harder than we thought it was going to be.
Christopher Argyris, did I get that right this time?
Yes, thank you so much, Ben. Hi, Anne. We're this spring we were 10 years on from the Smolensk air disaster, and I was thinking on September 11th that we didn't have social media back then, but in one sense, for me, like the Smolensk disaster was one of the first sort of things that was experienced live in real time, not just on TV, but through social media and through all the rumors and recriminations and conspiracy theories that developed after that. And so I wanted to ask you, sort of 10 years on from that, what extent do you feel that Poland's current situation in politics can trace its origins back to that moment, and what do you feel that how is that viewed in Poland 10 years on, and just wanted to.
Sure. So this is actually a major subject of my book, of Twilight of Democracy, which Ben has so kindly alluded to already. Because for those of you who don't know, this was a plane crash that killed the president of Poland. The reason why the plane crash happened was because he was in a great hurry to land the plane. He put a lot of pressure on the pilots to land. We know this even from the black boxes. And they landed in a dangerous circumstance at a kind of airstrip in Russia. He was on his way to lay a wreath on the memorial to Polish soldiers who'd been murdered by the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And anyway, the plane crashed, he died, and everybody on the plane died, including quite a lot of people from actually all across the Polish political spectrum. And I thought when immediately right after that happened, there was this immediately kind of rush of national sympathy, a little bit like 9/11 in the United States. Everybody wore black and everybody was horrified, and people seemed to accept initially that it was a terrible accident and so on. One of the things that happened, though, within about 6 months of that moment was that the president's twin brother, who happened to be the leader of the then opposition political party, immediately began fomenting conspiracy theories about the crash. And this will be really interesting to Americans because there's an American parallel. And he fomenting conspiracy theories. And he was never really clear about what they were. Maybe it was the then government, which included the Prime Minister Tusk and my husband, who was then the foreign minister. Maybe it was the Russians who'd done it. There was never any clear theory laid out, but it was simply this enormous amount of doubt. And they repeated this and they repeated this and they pumped it out and said it over and over and over again. And some percentage of the Polish population, probably about 20-30%, began to believe it. And if you think about what that means, that means that 25 to 30% of the Polish public believe that the president has died in a plane crash. It's the fault of the government who killed him. And I should say the government was of the opposite political party. We have one of those systems in European systems that's different. Okay, so the prime minister was the different center-right party. The president was a far-right party. Okay, or that's how it looks now. And so if you think about what that means, it means that that the government, the justice ministry, the police, the army, everybody is covering up this huge scandal, and everyone is lying, and the whole system is covering up the fact that there was a plot to kill the president. And
sound like something?
if you can believe that, you can believe anything. And that's, it's very like the story of birtherism. If you can believe, if the president of the United States is illegitimate, he's a fake president, and no one is telling you this, the FBI and the CIA and Congress and the White House and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal are all lying about this unbelievably essential fact that we have a fake and illegitimate president. If you can convince people of that, then you can inject really radical doubt into the whole political system. Because if you can believe that everybody, from I don't know, Nancy Pelosi to George W. Bush is covering something up, then you can believe anything. And that's how these conspiracy theories really do pave the way for authoritarianism, because they inject this radical doubt. And I do think that they've been made possible in part by social media, which can repeat them, emphasize them, create websites that promote them and say them over and over again, and reach people in ways that wouldn't have been possible in the past. But the role of conspiracy theory in undermining democracy should not be underestimated. I mean, it's absolutely key part of the story, both in Poland and in the United States.
Before we go to Tony, I just wanted to say Jonathan Rauch makes almost an identical point in his new book. It's excellent. So, and I just like, I really, and I, so it, not with Poland, but basically drawing the same conclusion you do. And I think I thought it was excellent when I read it in his.
It's in my book
I'm looking
too.
forward to reading it in yours.
That point is made in my book.
Yeah, great. I mean, it's not like the craziest of ideas, but it's also a point that I feel like cannot be stressed enough.
Tony Cava, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I apologize. I'm still. I'm sorry.
I got you mid-sip. Yeah, we can hear you.
Mid-sip, and who knows what's in this. I'm still on the clock over here on the West Coast, so I apologize. I haven't been able to watch the chat. And you may have covered this. And actually, after I posted the question about social media, you mentioned that you hate social media. So
no, hate is it's more complicated than that, but yeah.
Good. My question is, what role has social media played in the decay, for lack of a better word, of the political situation in Poland? And what are the similarities and differences between the mis/disinformation environment in Poland compared to what we see here?
So, I mean, social media, I neither love it nor hate it. I mean, it's a medium of communication. Okay. I mean, I've just been, an hour ago, I was on a call with Belarusian dissidents who were explaining how they use social media to get around the propaganda of their government, which, among other things, keeps shutting down the internet, which means that the only channel they can use is this app called Telegram. Which has had outsized influence there, and they were singing the praises of it, and they found it to be very useful. I mean, so all these media are only as good or as bad as the people who use them, and they can be used in many different ways. I mean, having said that, I do think that the particular flaws of, I would say, Facebook, YouTube, Google to some extent, because everybody has the search that, we don't realize the extent to which when we Google something, we see only the things that Google wants us to see or things that we want to see. And so the way that these various forms of social media and communication are affecting our democracy, I think are quite really profoundly damaging. On multiple levels, and this is maybe too long a conversation for this this informal chat, but ranging from creating these famous echo chambers in which you can hear over and over again repeated to you that Joe Biden is a pedophile and that he fell asleep during a live television interview, and look, you can see the film of it. And you can live in a world where you hear stuff like that and see it all the time and quite naturally believe that it's true. Or you can live in an alternative world where you see and hear something quite different. And it's not, the problem isn't just that some of that's fake and some of it's not fake. The problem is also that, democracy depends on some kind of shared public sphere, some kind of space where at least we're all debating the same facts, right? And we're having the same conversation. And if we're not having the same conversation, we don't agree on what the facts are, then it's very hard to see how we debate in a chamber, whether it's Congress or Parliament or whatever, and come to some consensus and conclusion. And the other thing that polarization does, and this splitting of people into different groups, is that it has the same effect as these conspiracy theories, that it makes one group think that the other group has captured the political system, and because they've captured the system, it's no longer trustworthy. If there are no longer any shared institutions, whether it's courts or police or I don't know, the FBI, then the FBI, oh, that's a Republican, or that's a Democrat, or that's a right wing, or that's a left wing institution, it has nothing to do with me. Then the use of these institutions is really undermined. I mean, then the third thing that social media does, not just in the US, but around the world, is that, as we know, the algorithms are designed to keep people on the page, or, keep people online. And in order to do that, they emphasize whatever keeps you online. And usually it's turned out that means, anything that makes you angry or upset or distressed. If those things move you to keep reading, then you'll see more and more and more of it. And so I just don't think it's an accident that there's so much more anger in our politics than there used to be, because people are surrounded by it all the time in a way that they weren't 10 years ago. And look, I mean, the virtual world is the world. I mean, there is no, we're having this conversation in a virtual context, and that's the context that we now live in. I mean, there's no distinction between the two anymore. I mean, you can't just say, well, that's virtual and this is reality. No, I mean, the virtual world is real. And I think a lot of the bad actors in politics were among those who figured that out first. I mean, look, the Trump campaign, we are watching something that's never really happened before in American history, which is we are watching a campaign that is predicated on the idea that it has to create a completely false picture of the world. So Trump has to convince people that, there is no coronavirus, or if there is, it doesn't matter, that 200,000 people haven't died, that the United States has done a great job dealing with it, and isn't in fact the worst, by far, the highest deaths in the world, but also by far the worst performance of any developed country, sorry. In which the economy is just fine. It's had a little knock, but it'll recover, and on and on. There is no climate change. That's not happening. And there is no, and anyone who talks about race or racism is a lefty, woke person. And there is no such, there's no nuance and there's no middle ground. And they have to create this picture of the world and show it to people, and convince people to believe it. And I think, and that's a different way to win an election. They're not making an argument, against Biden, or about policy, or we should have this size budget or that size budget. They're saying, here's our view of the world, believe it.
E.G. Phillips, I believe this is your first time on screen. Welcome to In Lieu of Fun. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Is the mic on?
It is.
All right.
Nice guitar.
Thank you. Yes, I occasionally play a musician. So my question was, if we can think of examples of cases where a country appeared to be on the brink of succumbing to an authoritarian takeover, but was able to avert that from happening, if there was any identifiable action steps could take based on those cases, if that's even possible, to say, yeah, that country is definitely going to become authoritarian. Oh, I guess they didn't, because they did that.
So I'm going to try and write something about this in the next few days. specifically in regard to this possibility that's been mooted in the Atlantic and elsewhere that Trump might genuinely try and steal the election, and what people can do about it. I mean, I think there's a range of answers, from civic, real civic engagement of the kind we were just talking about in Minsk, and the kind that can exist in America, and the creation of new kinds of organizations and links between people, and in particular links between people who saw the world in a different way only recently. I know that not everybody will agree with this, but I'm a great fan of the Lincoln Project, which is this group of ex-Republicans who are campaigning against Trump.
Several of them have come on in lieu of fun.
Right, but I mean, I'm interested in them because they are working on a project that I think is very important, which is how to make connections to people who are inside the Republican bubble, for lack of a better expression, and how to make connections between them and the rest of America. And the more links we can make, and the more we can bridge gaps, and the more we can win over, people who were, Reagan Democrats or Biden Republicans, the more important that is for the future. And so recreating a center and recreating centrist politics and figuring out what the language is that will appeal to people like that is a really important part of the story. I mean, there's a sort of much bigger, longer conversation to be had about, you can even look at American history at those moments when we were facing a huge crisis and collapse and disaster, and we somehow avoided it. And usually the example given is the creation of the New Deal in the 1930s, and which is an interesting example. But there's another one, which I've just written about in the context. The Atlantic has just published a collection of essays, and I wrote the epilogue to the collection. And the epilogue is about Theodore Roosevelt and the era of anti-monopoly laws and the decision to reinvent what was then American capitalism, which was this robber baron capitalism, and reinvent it as capitalism that would work also on behalf of small business and lower down the chain. If we can, and we may need some really profound, economic and social reforms that bring people together in different ways and end some of the excesses of the last 2 decades. I'm thinking about, ending kleptocracy, ending money laundering. I'm also thinking about internet regulation, not censorship, but regulation of these algorithms, for example, and maybe even antitrust legislation applied to the big tech companies. If we can begin to rewrite some of the rules so that the excesses of society of our society are controlled. I mean, that would be, those are 2 kind of different answers for how we come back from the brink. One is through public engagement, and the other would be, if Biden wins, if there is a Democratic Senate. And I say that not as a Democratic partisan. I'm not a member of the party or a partisan of the party, but if there was a possibility for genuine reform, these are the kinds of categories I would hope we would be thinking at. How do we save capitalism and make it work for ordinary people? How do we write a healthcare law that will bind people to America rather than forcing everybody to be on their own? I mean, those kinds of questions, answering them in the right way, I think could bring us back from the brink.
Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Now, my question is, thank you.
Whoa,
My question is, there's been a lot of writing on this.
Your voice is very fuzzy. Can Anne and Kate, can you hear her?
I didn't hear.
It's very garbled. It sounds like it's going through a vocoder or something, which is a bummer. Elizabeth, do you want
Why don't we read your question? Is that okay if Kate reads your question? Thank you.
asks, there are groups of conservatives writing that cancel culture on the left is leading to totalitarianism, and this is a bigger threat than authoritarianism. Could you address this?
So I signed the Harvard letter. I do think cancel culture is real. I am also somebody. I'm not getting an echo. I don't know where that's coming from, but I'm also someone who believes that. I mean, not who believes that. I mean, I wrote 3 books about left-wing dictatorship, so I don't have any illusions about the left, and I also don't think that authoritarian instincts are either left-wing or right-wing. I think they can be on both sides of the political spectrum, and I don't disagree at all. I do think that confronting Trump and ending this particular threat to our democracy is right now the more urgent problem. And I care about it more because I've seen how political parties like this, would-be authoritarian political parties can do lasting damage, irreversible damage, maybe irreversible damage in other countries, because once they have power and once they change the political system, it can be unbelievably difficult to unwind it again. What the far left has done in America has been incredibly damaging to universities, to some newsrooms, to some cultural institutions. They aren't yet in danger of having real political power. I mean, if Joe Biden, Joe Biden was the most moderate Democrat on offer, and he was the person who the party selected. The party did not select a left-wing ideologue to run the country, and so that gives me some faith that he at least understands who his base is and who his supporters are, and they are not the most extreme part of the left in America. And so, that's why I'm more worried about the right than the left. I mean, if the Democrats win and the threats that Trump posed are gone, and at the same time, it suddenly looks like some version of whether it's illiberalism or whether it's intolerance is emerging, on the left, I will write about that. But it doesn't seem to me right now to pose the kind of existential threat that the right does. That's the best.
So I love Elizabeth's question, and I think that, and also I'm sorry, it's my fault that you're getting an echo. I'm having issues with my headphones today. I've been on Zoom all day, and so I've just have to take them off. But the question that I was going to kind of ask as a follow-up to Elizabeth's point is, I read an article, a law review article, many years now, about the shaming culture around that was developing and was very prevalent, but mostly you were seeing it against women in kind of the Gamergate culture or video game culture, in which women were being called out and shamed and harassed and doxxed in various ways. There are a number of other examples that I kind of highlighted and gave attention to. But what's interesting about this, and I'm kind of thinking of coming back to it in light of like everything that's happened about the left in the last couple of years, is that there's this, it just seems to have become both, we know to dismiss it more quickly and focus on it more quickly. Like, we have developed norms around when to identify that it's happening and someone is blowing up or being canceled or being shamed. And then we also just seem to do it so much more, and with less thought as to how it actually makes people feel. And I think, and how it has long-term ramifications, even though it might fade away for us very quickly, to whoever is being shamed or whoever is being canceled or whoever is having this experience, it's pretty damning. So I'm just curious if this is one of the faults you find with social media in general, is that there is just this, I think that there's a disambiguation between all of the things that shame used to require of us. Like non-anonymity, you had to shame someone in person, you had to like put your own reputation on the line, you had to do all of these other things. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are with that on social media right now.
Yeah, by the way, there's a very good book by a British journalist called John Ronson.
Oh yeah, no, I know John. Yeah, so you've been publicly shamed.
That's right. Which is about exactly this. And you're absolutely right that it's not inherently. Again, this is not inherently right wing or left wing. In fact, the only time I've come close to being, I wouldn't say canceled, that's overdoing it, but harassed online, it was from the right and not from the left. So maybe that even explains my own views. But
although Anne, you have very thick skin, the stuff that you have been subjected to from the right would make a lot of people crawl under a rock.
I can't tell you the degree to which I don't care. I mean,
I know, but don't say you're not subject to it. You don't care. But I mean, for everybody who is even inclined to pause for a moment to take Anne seriously when she says she's never been subject to cancel culture, I would just urge you to take a little look at the conspiracy theories about Anne.
I also I've seen stuff I'm surprised to hear you say that. Like, I really think that would bother you. I'm amazed that it doesn't. I hope, God, you should give like a workshop on that or something about how to not care about being canceled.
I don't even know how to describe it. I genuinely don't care. I use the delete, block, I don't argue on Twitter. Every so often I get dragged into something, but the policy is block, block, block. If I don't like it for any reason, if I just find it a little irritating, block, and then I don't ever have to see it again.
We just found out what happened to Scott Shapiro.
You guys are probably seeing stuff about me that I don't even know about because I blocked hundreds of people. And so
no, but come on. You write in your book about being the subject of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories in Poland, right?
Yeah, I do, but it's and those actually bothered me initially because that was now 5 or 6 years ago, and then at some point, you also learn that, your friends don't see this stuff and they don't care. And I don't know. This is the upside of the filter bubble, right? In my filter bubble, the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about me don't exist. So why should I worry about them? That's kind of, that's the conclusion I've come to. Why should I care about it?
So I promised Anne that we were going to end on time, and we are, which gives us 3 minutes, which is time for one more question, which I'm going to seize for myself. Anne, we worked together for the entire time you were at the Washington Post. It must have been about 5 years, right?
Yeah, 5 years, 4 or 5 years, yeah.
We had adjacent offices. Mm-hmm. We spent a huge amount of time together. And I think it was fair to say that we were probably you were the sort of right edge of the Washington Post editorial page, and I was the sort of just to your left, kind of, if there was a spectrum. Is that fair?
It's fair. It wasn't a very broad spectrum, but yeah, I'd say that's fair.
It was a sort of center left to center right spectrum, and we were kind of the conservative-ish end of it. Yeah. I feel now this very deep connection to people on the left and the center left who I feel like I didn't realize this before and they didn't realize it before, but we kind of discovered a shitload of shared values at the expense of a whole lot of people who I thought shared my values and are, now working in the administration or being just not, as you say, alarmed enough early enough. And so I'm just curious about how you feel about, people on the left and center left who you always would have regarded maybe as friends, but as sort of political adversaries who sound like you today.
Oh, I mean, this is one of the main themes of my book. I mean, and this is how the book ends, with this idea that you reconfigure your alliances, and that this has always happened. That as events unfold and as people react differently to them, you find new allies in new situations. And there's absolutely people in Poland, my God, all my friends now are people who I thought were too left-wing for me 25 years ago. And to some extent that's true in Britain, and there's a degree to which it's true in the US as well. I mean, the tectonic plates shift, and the issues that, if fighting the Soviet Union was the most important issue in 1988, then, fighting, creeping illiberalism is the most important issue now. And there are different allies in that fight. And it turns out that the people who you thought were on your side aren't. And I mean, in a way, so my book that we are talking about kind of peripherally, describes a series of parties. Okay. I mean, some that I gave and some that other people gave. I mean, there's sort of, it's not the main theme of the book, but it kind of comes up as a sort of leitmotif. Okay. And one of the reasons is because it is so interesting to me how the guest lists evolve over time. And that happens to all of us anyway. We just make friends and lose friends, or we lose touch with people and so on. But if you're really interested in politics, and if a lot of your friends are, then the guest list, the shifting guest list, is also a political movement. And I mean, the person who pointed out to this to me was David Frum, who gives a lot of parties and
parties, among other things.
Yeah, and who, has people come to his house who he wouldn't have spoken to, 25 years ago, and people who used to come all the time are no longer there. And so, and when he said that to me, I thought, oh yeah, you know what, that's happened to all of us. And I agree with you completely. I mean, I now have completely different allies. I see myself as part of a different set of alliances than I would have done, in the 1990s. And I suppose that's normal. I mean, that's just what happens. I mean, one of the things I did in the book is I got interested in the question of, had this kind of thing ever happened before? And I hit upon the story of the Dreyfus trial. Ben, you and I have talked about this before.
Indeed.
Which is an amazing moment in the history of France when, again, a group of people who kind of thought they were all on the same side suddenly discovered they had these unbelievably fundamental differences and different idea of what the French state was. Was it a kind of mystic thing that you're connected to by ancient ethnic whatever, or was it a set of institutions that are supposed to dispense justice? And which side were you on? And people split. And then I discovered that Marcel Proust, wrote about this. I mean, he wrote about the way in which the Dreyfus trial changed parties, because it was Proust basically wrote about, this an endless, very, very, very long book about parties. And he wrote about how the Dreyfus trial affected which salon you went to and which people you were friends with, and then and then how the alliances shifted once again after World War I and so on. So this is an old part of human nature in politics, that we remake our coalitions, and we find again who our friends are, and we think harder about what our values are and with whom we want to be connected, depending on what happens.
All right, we are going to leave it there. A quick poll is up for those of you who want it. The book is The Twilight of Democracy, and I usually end by saying to the guest that he or she is a great American. In your case, I have to say, Anne Applebaum, you're a great American, a great Brit, and a great Pole. I think that covers the scope of your citizenship. And you're also a super great friend, and it's great to see you, if only in 2 dimensions. And I look forward to seeing you in person again.
In real life, yeah.
is real life, as they say. Although this is real life now.
This is real life, yeah. Cheers. I have an Aperol Spritz I'm going to now finish, so thank you.
And go to bed, and we will be back tomorrow. Will be Saturday, so it'll be just Kate and me. And until then, Kate?
We don't have fun anymore, but we do have polls and also a poll. What? Sorry,
Yeah.
no one liked my joke.
Yeah.
I didn't
got
get
it.
I didn't get it.
Well, we have a poll, Ben, on the show. She's Polish, and then there's also a poll in our poll.
Oh, I see.
See?
I get it.
Sorry.
Oh, I see. I get it.
I really shouldn't have had to explain the joke. That kind of ruined it. Oh, well, whatever. Anyways, it was so lovely to meet you, Anne. Thank you